right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for coming out to what is the second now annual Mount Jumbo Elk Spotters get-together. Last year was our first year hosting this event, and it was so well received, we wanted to do it again. This is a time to celebrate all you elk spotters and your roles as volunteer citizen scientists. It's also a time for us all to come together and get to know your fellow elk spotters, and for us all to learn more and help advocate for this special resource that makes Missoula so unique. I'd like just to point out that there is food and beverages in the back, so please feel free to get up at any point and help yourself. The bathrooms are located out the door this way. Make a left-hand turn and you can't miss them. There's also a water fountain and water bottle filling station there. Again, at any point, feel free to get up, leave, do what you need to do. We won't be offended at all. Before we get started, I'd like to take a quick second here and go through a round of introductions and thank yous. My name is Mike Sharp, and I'm the Outreach and Stewardship Coordinator for the Conservation Lands Program. Tonight, we're grateful for our two guest speakers. We have Ryan Klimstra here from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And we also have Heather Abernathy from the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation right here. Thank you so much for coming. And also another shout out for the Elk Foundation for donating, generous donation of our door prizes. Tonight we got a backpack, we got a knife, and we got a mug. So at the conclusion of our presentations here and after our question and answer session, we'll go ahead and draw names for the prizes. Let's see where we're at here. I'd also like to thank Mr. Decker. Mr. Decker, where are you at? There's Mr. Decker. Mr. Decker, whose second grade class from the Rattlesnake Elementary is this year's junior, is hosting this year's Junior Elk Spotters. So we really appreciate your classroom's participation as Junior Elk Spotters. And do we have any Junior Elk Spotters in the house today? Hey, thanks for coming out. It's awesome that you came. Thank you so much. We also have additional staff here from Conservation Lands helping me put this on and supporting this event. We have Hillary here, and we have Peter and Jeff over here. Thank you, guys. And also, last but not least, I'd like to introduce our new director from Parks and Rec, Marina. Marina, where are you at? Hey, thank you, Marina. We're really excited that you came out tonight to learn more about the Elk Spotters program, and we're excited to work for you and for your leadership, so thank you so much. We'll have time for questions at the end of the presentations, but I do ask that we just hold all questions till everybody's done presenting, and then there should be ample enough time for our for our question and answer session. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. We'd like to start with just a brief background to the program, as I know we do have some folks in attendance that might not be current elk spotters and came to learn more about this program. So the Elk Spotters program is a volunteer citizen scientist program launched by Parks and Rec in 2013, aimed at monitoring elk activity on Mount Jumbo to help land managers make informed decisions. Elk spotters report their observations either online using a simple-to-use GIS reporting form, or some prefer to turn in the paper reporting forms that breaks the mountain down into 11 distinct observation zones, A through K. The elk spotters data reported includes the date and time of sightings, the location of the animals by waypoint or observation zone, the number of elk, and any other notable observations that you might see when you're checking the mountain out, like the number of elk, or the number of bulls, bull to cow ratio, or even trespass on the closure. The program started with just 6 elk spotters in its inaugural year and has now grown to over 100 participants, including the junior elk spotters. Which brings us to our next slide. Welcome, Junior Elk Spotters. This season, we partnered up again with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation to bring the Junior Elk Spotters program into a second grade classroom at Rattlesnake Elementary. The Elk Foundation was again so generous to donate 10 pair of Vortex binoculars to the program, and staff from Conservation Lands and Elk Foundation visited the classroom last fall for a presentation and to present them with their binoculars, and they made their first observation of 18 elk on the 18th of December last year. A field trip's being planned for the spring to the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation as part of the program. We'll see how much energy Mr. Decker's got by that time of the year to see if we can facilitate that or not. But our hopes with starting the Junior Elk Spotters program really is to educate and inspire the next generation of stewards of Mount Jumbo and its wintering elk herd. So your data at a glance. The Elk Spotters data is used to make more informed decisions about resource management on Mount Jumbo. It specifically helps land managers make decisions on opening and closure dates and also helps guide decisions about timber and vegetation management. I kind of like this slide because kind of shows the historical changes of Mount Jumbo through the years. 100 years ago it was primarily a grassland system. And you can see today we have a mosaic of grassland and conifer stands. Elk benefit from both of these systems, and forest stands offer shelter from winter weather, and the grasslands, of course, provide most of the forage they need. So we need to take this into consideration in our management strategies as we look at Mount Jumbo in a more holistic picture. Next slide there. Now I'm going to just turn it over to Hillary. Hillary is our inventory and monitoring specialist. She typically takes a closer look at the data here, so I'll leave her talk about these next couple slides. Hillary?
Thanks, Mike. So these next two graphs, the big picture that I'm sharing with you is that both the elk herd and the Elk Spotters program are growing. The main takeaway from the orange line on this graph is that the high number of elk observed on Mount Jumbo has been increasing for the last 6 years. And this year we have a record high of 134 elk, give or take 5. It could be a little off, but for sure verified it's at least 126 or 7. Then the bar graph part of this shows how long elk were present on the mountain each winter. And this year, the first group of elk were observed on September 29th. And this is actually the earliest date we have recorded since we started the program in 2013. And we don't know yet how long the elk will be present on Jumbo this year. So the last bar is the light blue area is just my potential for this year. We don't know, so we're at kind of where that blue line ends, and then the light blue area is just like, could be anywhere in there, but probably somewhere in the middle. And then this is you. This is you showing your participation over the years. The last couple of winters, the number of people making observations and the number of overall observations have drastically increased. And the dashed lines, again, are just showing my estimates for what could be a projection for the end of this year of where we'll end up, but I don't know that yet. So that's it.
So thank you, Hillary. And these are just some reminders. Don't forget, reporting zero elk is still valuable data to know where the elk aren't when we're not seeing them. Reporting any observed trespass during the closure will help protect the herd. You can either call 911 or the new Mount Jumbo tip line is probably the preferred way. Jeff?
Actually, if you see an active trespasser, please call 911. The tip line is mainly for when trespass has occurred. Right now, Missoula Police is looking for help to identify individuals that have been recorded on compliance monitoring cameras. We're really intending the tip line. You won't get someone when you call the tip line, it's a voicemail. You call 911, there's the ability to respond and either send park staff or a police officer up to engage with that individual while they're on. So if you see active trespass, please call them.
Thanks, Jeff. Important dates just to keep in mind. I'm sure a lot of you are already aware of these, but we'll go over them again. December 1st, of course, Mount Jumbo closes down. We're looking at March 15th or later for the south zone to open. With this weather, we're probably on track with that. But of course, those dates are subject to your observations of knowing where the elk are and green up surveys just to make sure that there is enough forage for them to sustain them in the north zone. And if that's the case, May 1st or later, then the north zone opens and Jumbo is officially completely open. So with that said, I'm excited to hear from our next couple guest speakers here and learn more about elk. So I'd like to turn it over to Ryan now. Ryan?
Thanks. It'll take me just a moment here to switch out some hardware. Wow, that was a lot easier than I expected. Okay, I guess I actually have to do this. All right, so again, my name's Ryan Klimstra. I work for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I am the Missoula area wildlife biologist. I manage hunt districts 200, 201, and 202. And so Jumbo, of course, is, well, and parts of 260. And so the Missoula Valley, or excuse me, the Bitterroot Valley at the very top of it, you know, where it all comes together, that's 260. It's kind of, at any rate. So Jumbo is mine. I inherited this when I moved here, and boy, is it a fun survey. I don't know how many folks have flown in a small plane before. I've done a lot of that in my career. Jumbo is probably one of the more challenging places to fly and observe elk from the backseat of a Super Cub. And the reason being, it's the Hellgate Canyon. So what happens in the Hellgate Canyon? It gets windy. What happens when wind hits a big hill? There's updrafts and downdrafts. And so it's actually, when I said it was a lot of fun, I was actually being sarcastic. It's actually the worst part of my flights every year. But we're going to get to that. This group has actually helped me tremendously to where I don't necessarily have to do that. So there's a lot of bouncing around, a lot of swearing, and some pictures are taken, and you know, and then we move on. So if you were here last year, the first part of this presentation is going to be very similar or identical, but I'm going to ease into some other issues that I want to talk about today. Got a couple of nice photos of Jumbo here. So other herds that we have in the Missoula Valley, of course, are here on the map. We've got North Hills, Miller Creek, O'Brien Creek, and Lolo, and those numbers are still accurate as they were last year. So those are kind of the ranges that we typically find in these areas each year. So what is winter range and why is it important to elk? I'm used to talking to classes a lot, and I was actually going to say, does anybody want to raise their hand? But I guess I'll just tell you. So winter range for elk is probably one of the more important things. It provides a lot of different things for them, right? It provides a security area. There has to be thermal cover when it's extremely cold out. Elk also need to get thermal relief by moving into the timber. So that's an integral part of winter range. It has to have some sort of timber and also security from predators. Aside from that, it also needs moisture in the form of snow and snow melt, and then vegetation that is high in crude protein that they can digest and maintain their body reserves to help get them through the winter, and also carry calves and things like that. So Jumbo is like perfect winter range for elk. So it's kind of the cornerstone of this valley, and way back when there was an imminent threat of development, right? And so this group is kind of a product of all that, right? So people realize that, you know, this is kind of an important spot. And before, you know, the whole complex was kind of purchased, developers were actually producing models of what it would look like if we had houses and development in the saddle that you can see right there. So instead of those 41 elk that we were looking at, we'd be looking at a bunch of houses. Elk and houses tend to not do well directly right together. So as I said, elk were the driving force behind this. The community really came together for this. These are some of the partners that really made this happen. So some of the numbers. So it's approximately 1,700 acres from 96 to 98 that were acquired, and that cost roughly $3.2 million. So FWP actually has one of the smallest parcels up there. Ours is only 120 acres, but it is actually considered a wildlife management area to the state. And so we treat it as such. It is a wildlife management area, which means that its primary purpose and focus is to produce high quality wildlife habitat. That's the purpose. That's how it was funded through, or that portion of it was funded through Pittman and Robertson dollars, which is a tax on hunting, fishing, well, Dingle Johnson is for fishing, but for hunting things such as ammunition, guns, all that kind of stuff, there's a tax the federal government has that then is distributed to states, and so this is how we chose to use some of that. And then a lot of the other money was raised by all those partners I showed earlier. So it was on, I believe, March 27th was the official, which, is there a big party, Jeff? I feel like there should be a big party on March 27th every year. Oh, oh boy. 26th anniversary, 30? It is, yeah, yeah, 97, yeah, wow. Yeah, math. So at any rate, 97 is when it was first acquired, and then that's when things started building. That's when people started realizing that there's going to be some challenges to this area. Given the community that we live in, recreation is a huge part of everyone's daily lives, or a lot of people's daily lives here, as it should be. And, you know, we all live here partially because of that. Well, are there ways to sustainably recreate and also have high-quality habitat for elk or other wildlife species and kind of coexist on the landscape? Absolutely. And so this complex up here is a testament to that, just that we can coexist and recreate in the same place and also have a growing elk herd. So some of the recreation things that were initially realized was, you know, mountain biking, hiking, letting your dog run loose, chasing elk, which you should not do, paragliding, all that kind of stuff. So it was really apparent that, hey, we gotta put some sideboards on this, and so that's when the closures were really kind of first developed, all the way back in '96. And there's an example of the kind of the signs and how this has evolved. This is an example of a sign that people walk past more recently when they shouldn't. So it's well signed up there, which is really important. I'm going to talk about the importance of the closure. So I mentioned all those facets of winter range and why that's important to elk. Well, elk, the disturbance of elk can be very taxing from a caloric standpoint, right? If you think about, if you just stand still and ate, you know, 3 pizzas back there and you just stayed there, you'd probably not need to eat again for a while, right? Well, if you ate 3 pizzas and then someone chased you all over this library, or you were just afraid of this big bad man that came in and you kept going from room to room, you'd probably have to eat a little bit sooner because you're burning energy. Well, it's no different for elk, you know, so they really need you know, a place where they can just stand, especially on extremely harsh winters when we have extremely cold temperatures, or we have like a rain on snow event that locks up vegetation. Those are specifically or especially taxing to elk, and bumping them around the mountain can cause like kind of long-term effects at a population level. There's actually evidence that elk that are constantly disturbed can, you know, abort calves in late winter. And then the thing that we're really focused on a year like this year, where people think, oh, well, it's not that bad of a winter, no big deal, right? No harm, no foul. Well, on a winter like this, what we run into are issues with habituation. Okay, so elk become then maybe accustomed to people, you know, and then it becomes a safety issue, right, for dogs and people. You know, if elk aren't afraid of people or dogs and they're just used to seeing them and used to them approaching, they do eventually get used to those type of things, and then they get into trouble in other locations. It's not just here that we're worried about. We want to be good neighbors to people that have ranches on the other side that these elk might cross into. We don't want them to think that, hey, just because a guy's in his yard, we can walk up there. We don't want them thinking that, right? So it's really important that we that we keep that habituation at a minimum, and we also don't want to create any issues down in the rattlesnake. So here's an example of a trespasser, and this was just ignorance on the trespasser. They were not aware. Since then, this was obviously an old photo. Since then, there have been a lot more signs have been placed, and there's been a lot of education and outreach to let people know what we really need and the cooperation we need from the public. And this group has been integral in that. Here's some other examples of the effort to get the elk spotters program started. So this is an example of a photo taken from a Super Cub in the back seat when we're flying surveys. And as you can see from this photo, we could probably count all these, but are there any underneath this wing strut? Yeah, probably. There's probably a couple under there. When you're circling at about 300 feet, that looks like about 300 feet off the ground, you're circling, there's a wing strut that obstructs your vision. I'm taking the best photos I can. A lot of times I get back to the office, I count them, and then I determine the demographic makeup of the population, whether it's cows, yearlings, bulls, how old the bulls are based on antler size. I can do a pretty good job looking at a computer to do the demographic part, but the count itself in this particular case can be really challenging just because of the flying conditions. Here's some other neat pictures. This was obviously from the plane also. We're flying below the skyline there. Another really nice one. That's one of my favorites. So, again, citizen scientists needed. This was a great opportunity for the community to participate in active management of a game species right here in our yard. I'm not aware of any other cities of this size in the nation where you can stand in the library and look out and see wild elk on the side of a hill. I mean, maybe that exists, but I don't know. Does anybody know? Is there a place like? I don't know of one. So this is an extremely unique situation that we don't want to let slip away. And again, that's why it's really important that we educate folks about the habituation issues. So, again, 2013 is when the elk spotters started. What's the main difference you see here? Does anybody want to take a stab at this? Do the elk spotters do better than maybe I did or my predecessor Liz at any point? Yeah, I can only get a plane, when the weather's good, right? And at certain times of the year, maybe the pilot has to do other things. I usually fly with Minuteman Aviation. Even though the airport's right there and we can be up there circling in 5 minutes from takeoff, sometimes the elk don't stay on the mountain, so the elk spotters actually, you guys can see it a lot of times and get a better count than what we can do in this situation, which is, we are starting to realize is really important. I didn't even fly last year. That's how much I was relying on it. There's part of it was we had some funding issues, but also I started alternating my survey units at the Hunt District level, and Hunt District 201, which this includes, was not on the docket for last year's survey. But guess what? We still got a jumbo number because of you guys. So how do we use this information that you're creating? It's really invaluable to us. These accurate counts from the ground, when I'm flying in a plane, I'm constantly moving. Granted, I can take pictures, but sometimes they're blurry. Sometimes there's some missing with the wing strut or the wing or what have you. From the ground, you're getting an accurate count, which is fantastic. Again, provides data on years we can't fly. Also, the whole timing and the seasonal use. That's something we really want to pay attention to. What's going on? Why are they showing up earlier? These are things we probably want to, keep our finger on the pulse and investigate if it continues. What parts of the hill are they using most? And that really helps the city and ourselves making management decisions, whether it be a prescribed burn, a timber treatment, or some weed spraying. This helps us narrow in on where to apply that. And again, identifying that and reporting illegal use is super important now. So recently, the state finished its statewide elk management plan, and the efforts of this group actually showed up as something we'd use in our plan. So you should all give yourselves a round of applause for that. I don't know of any other citizen groups that made it into the elk management plan as something that we, are kind of using here. And so, work with the city of Missoula to manage seasonal closures on winter range of Mount Jumbo, and that's directly using, these numbers to either extend the season, but also to, to monitor the population. So, all right, that's not an elk. I think we all know that by now, I hope. If not, then I should probably start over and do a different presentation. But so I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about CWD. I know that's probably been at the front of mind, at least for myself, the city, and then other hunters. There's been a lot of media around it. There's been a lot of talk about CWD. So let's talk about it, and let's talk about what that means for Mount Jumbo. CWD was first discovered in Colorado in '67 in captive research deer. It then kind of started spreading around that facility and then into other wild populations of elk and mule deer. And then in 2002, Wisconsin, and then currently we have it in 36 states, 4 provinces, and in captive cervid facilities in 22 states and 3 provinces. Jeff. I'm getting there. So, I went the wrong way. So, well, I thought it was on the slide, dang it. So thanks, Jeff. So CWD is short for chronic wasting disease. And it's a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. That's just a big word for saying it's a misfolded protein that gets in the brain or in the spinal tissue and recruits other proteins to act like it. And it ultimately, and the protein is called the misfolded protein is called a prion. So normal cellular prion, you got normal function, all that stuff. When you get this misfolded form, lots of things go wrong. And long story short, it's 100% fatal to all ungulate species that it affects. So mule deer, white-tailed deer, elk, moose, think all of those. It's 100% fatal if they get this disease. The problem with it is there's not a lot known about it, okay? So in nature, like I said, we get elk, mule deer, moose, white-tailed deer, and then reindeer. So far, the species barrier, meaning can it go from an ungulate to a human or a mammal? That barrier is super duper strong right now. So the thought is there's not much human risk, but personally, I don't want to consume something or touch something that is 100% fatal to something else. That's just kind of like the way I live my life, right? That's just kind of makes sense to me. So in lab experiments, they have been able to transmit this, and this is physically taking the CWD prion and injecting that material directly into the brain of those species. They were able to make it hold. But that was the only way. So let's see, what else? Like I said, human risk believed to be very low, high species barrier. But why am I talking about this? So transmission of CWD, which we do have in the state of Montana, if you weren't familiar. We don't have it in Missoula County or Mineral County at this time, or Ravalli County. Most of Region 2, which FWP manages, does not contain CWD. We've had one positive case near the Deer Lodge area in a mule deer, and that was 2 years ago, and we haven't had anything since. So it can be transmitted between animals, both directly and indirectly. It can be through all these ways here. So you got urine, feces, saliva, blood, semen, milk. So think about that. So elk, deer, all those animals are kind of herd animals. If they're touching noses, they're licking a salt block. If they're at your bird feeder, if they're all these different places, they could be contracting CWD, and it's a density-dependent disease, which means it relies on high density of animals, herd animals, white-tailed deer in the city, things like that. It relies on that to basically survive and propagate. The scary thing for me is that animals that die on the landscape that are CWD positive can deposit large amounts of CWD into the environment. And all we know now is that it persists for 10 plus years, probably indefinitely in the soil, because it's not a living thing. It's just a misfolded protein. So it's just there. So you can imagine you go to somewhere where there's a high prevalence of CWD, you harvest an animal, it becomes positive, you bring it back here, you butcher it, and you dump the carcass in the woods. That could be a problem. So FWP is working very hard and very successfully in a lot of locations to kind of mitigate a lot of these issues. And this isn't meant to scare or to say that jumbo elk are doomed, because that's not the case. I just want to help start the conversation as also more fodder for support on the Elk Spotters group and these citizen science projects. So let's see, we're enough on that. So it can have population level impacts. Another problem with CWD is that it takes quite a long time before there are visible symptoms. And so what we're finding is that most of the time it's older aged animals, older aged males are typically the ones that spread the most CWD. Primarily because older aged males tend to be a little bit more dominant in a herd, and they also travel quite a bit more in search of harems or other does or cows or whatever. So there is evidence that it does cause population effects. One of the best ways to mitigate this that has been found by research scientists across the nation is to reduce density. So this is a map of CWD across the nation and then Canada, and you can see we do have some in Montana. And here's a more detailed map. So this is not all positive samples. The positive samples show up in this bigger red dot here. And so we have had one up on Flathead Reservation, of course, Libby area, most recently Kalispell, and then down the Ruby Valley there, and then, of course, along the High Line. So the point is, CWD is out there. It's around. It's probably a matter of time before we find CWD somewhere closer to us. So I'm urging folks to any sick or injured elk, deer that you come across to report those to FWP, just so we can hopefully get some samples. So that's where we're at right now. Is our goal is to to collect as many samples as we can to monitor the situation. The more we know, the better we can react. So we test animals for free. I don't know how many folks in here hunt. If you do, you're able to bring those right to us during hunting season. We'll test them for free, and you get the sample back in about a week that lets you know if it's negative. And you can also collect your own sample and mail it in. The city has been very helpful with this process too. Most recently, we have kind of partnered up with the city, with all their different departments, to notify us of when there are roadkill, and or if they find one in their parks or something like that. Most likely it's tied to a car collision or car strike. So it's important for us to keep monitoring these things and kind of keep tabs on it. Again, like I said, the more we know, the better we can react. So how do we kind of mitigate and prevent? And this is how we tie back into the jumbo elk, that habituation issue. We don't want elk becoming accustomed to going into people's yards or haystacks or going to a grain bin or to a bird feeder. And that goes for white-tailed deer as well. And so this is kind of my plug for being considerate of feeding wildlife. It is illegal except for birds and squirrels, but attracting those things to a central location can help spread this stuff. But again, we're still learning about the effectiveness of non-harvest based techniques. But the silver lining that I want to say here before I end is that this isn't, again, I don't want, my point here is not to alarm anyone. There are cities across this nation that have had it for a decade or more, and they still have deer, they still have hunting, they still have wildlife viewing opportunities. This isn't an end to wildlife as we know it by any means. It's just going to be something that we are probably going to have to deal with in the next, who knows, 10, 20, 30, 100 years from now. It's hard to say. But I just wanted to bring some awareness to the CWD conversation in Missoula, and you'll probably be seeing more and more education throughout the coming years about CWD, and hopefully citizen science groups like this can help participate and kind of guide those conversations with the community and be an advocate for the city and ourselves in our mission to mitigate these things and to keep wildlife on the landscape for us. So I know that wasn't as much about jumbo elk as you'd probably hoped, and it probably went way over time. But if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy. Or do we need to go straight to the next?
Can you guys hear me? Oh my gosh. Hi. Good afternoon, or good evening, I should say. My name is Heather Abernathy. I'm the lead research scientist for the Elk Foundation. I'm essentially a research scientist, but also help direct their research. I'm not going to be talking about the Elk Foundation much today. Happy to in the Q&A. But today I'm going to be talking to you about elk behavior. So I got my PhD 4 years ago, and my specialty is animal behavior. And we can talk more about that if it makes sense. But it was on predator-prey interactions of white-tailed deer and Florida panthers. Since then, I've worked with mule deer and elk in western Wyoming, looking at competition between both those species. And then most recently, before the Elk Foundation, I worked for the Forest Service, looking at how recreation influences wildlife across our country. So have a little bit of background in animal behavior, and I want to talk to you all about it and how it integrates with the awesome work you folks are doing. So I'm going to close this because I'm going to trip. But before I can talk to you guys about elk behavior or animal behavior in general, we all have to agree on what elk behavior or animal behavior mean. To pull a Ryan here, I'm just going to ask you guys, what do you think animal behavior means if you had to define it? Interaction with each other in the environment. Good. Sir? Yeah. So essentially, yes, it is an individual or social behavior of animals that links to survival. And that's why it's able to be passed along. Behaviors are often heritable because they are contributing to survival or not. And what's driving behavior is, oh my Lord. Okay, perfect. So instincts, learning, and environment all contribute to behavior and drive behavior. And Ryan did a great job teeing up learning and how learning and the environment drive elk behavior in mountain jumbo, specifically learning as it relates to humans and the environment as it relates to animals moving to winter range. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit, but before I want just to take a step back, and I'm sure everyone in this room knows it, but I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Elk and animals are often responding to, instincts, their environment, or something that they have learned. And that includes things like weather. So animals will alter their behavior to thermoregulate, as you can see with this animal here. They'll alter their behavior to move seasonally to access resources or avoid deep snowpack. They'll also change their behavior based on group composition. So you can see that these animals aren't backing down from these wolves because there are quite a lot of animals within the area. And so group composition can sometimes drive behavior of animals as well. And then finally, prior disturbance or experience. So here is some photos from Arizona, actually, where some elk are quite aggressive to citizenry in the town. Actually, I think there was maybe a fatality or injury with some really aggressive elk. But essentially, prior disturbance, prior experience with people with no negative consequences can create habituation, and in this case, drive behavior. And so we can all agree that elk, like other animals, are behaviorally responding based on instinct, learning, and environment. And I just talked about a few examples of how that can happen. So we can all agree on that. The animal behavior is this thing that we agree on. So yay, we did that. Okay, so now that we agree on what is behavior, how do we quantify animal behavior? This is something that's much trickier because you're taking something that almost feels a bit abstract, visual observations, for example, and quantifying it in a rigorous way that science demands. And most of what we think we know about elk behavior as a field, animal ecology, for example, comes from observing patterns. And I want to take a step back and talk about how we got here as a field. So in the 1930s, scientists in a laboratory were wondering the same thing. They say, how do we take these observations that we know mean something to animals and make it actually quantifiable? And they developed these things called ethograms. Have you all ever heard of an ethogram? Okay, well, let me show you, for the folks that don't know. This is a real risk playing a video, so please bear with me. It's kind of scary. It's not my computer, and I don't know if it will work, but hopefully it does.
One of the diagnostic feely things about narcissism is the person takes up the room, right? They take up all.
Okay. So I want to talk to you guys about this example of a student.
The mixed species habitat.
I want to talk to you guys through this video a little bit. So this is essentially a oh, you can't see. So I'm going to walk you through this video. Essentially, this is a student who is wanting to quantify animal behavior of zoo animals. I believe in this case it's an elephant with math. And so he's going to basically walk through sort of his excitement and, hey, can I quantify these things with math? And a zookeeper sort of walks him through what an ethogram is. Most zoos actually do these ethogram behaviors for animal enrichment, and some actually offer volunteer opportunities to do ethograms, just as sort of an FYI. But here's sort of an inside scoop to quantifying animal behavior.
I've always loved watching animals here at the mixed species habitat, but I wonder, can we measure their behavior? And if so, are there any math patterns connected to it?
Yes, we can measure animal behavior, which is really helpful if we want to learn more about the way an animal lives and how to help it if there's a problem.
If you think about it, behavior is basically just how the animal interacts with its environment or with others. I've heard that mathematicians are working right now with animal biologists to study that behavior and measure it. It's so cool to see all these new studies of field come alive.
Exactly. In fact, the beginning point of searching for patterns in animal behavior is to measure and track animal behavior using something called an ethogram. An ethogram is a catalog or table of different kinds of behavior being observed in an animal. Then you can look for patterns of behavior in the data collected in the ethogram. Let's take a look at an ethogram.
Here's an example of an ethogram. This is the same one that the zoo uses for their elephants. It's for a 10-minute observation that is split into 10 one-minute intervals. So each time that the stopwatch
And so essentially what this student is doing and what ethograms allow us to capture then are frequency and duration of behaviors. And he's going to talk a little bit more about that.
The researcher, it's been 1 minute. They record the information. The animal researchers are interested in collecting these specific data about elephants. Take a look at these categories.
The categories include movement or locomotion, location in the habitat, distance from other elephants, and specific behaviors. Let's look at a sample data set for Gypsy the elephant.
So just by looking at the location data, Gypsy started out in the pool and moved over to near the fig tree in the first 5 minutes.
Here's a map of the area. So Gypsy moved along this area in the first 5 minutes.
Near the bottom of the ethogram, we can see that for each category, like behaviors, locomotion, and so forth, there were a total of 10 observations recorded within this 10-minute observation of Gypsy the elephant. And they converted her activities into percentage, which is very useful.
There's a lot you can do with this ethogram data to look for Gypsy's behavioral patterns. Here's a bar graph showing her activity budget over the 10-minute observation.
Looks like Gypsy really likes to eat. I can imagine that as the animal researchers gathered lots of ethogram data for her, they could know if this was a consistent pattern, where she spends the.
And so what the student just said is sort of the key of what these ethograms allow us to capture, are these consistent patterns that we can take these visual observation and turn them into data to collect over time periods to understand drivers' motivation or just basic biology of animals. And so often folks in zoos will do this with their animals to understand, are the animals enriched enough? Are they happy enough? And if not, how can we change their enclosure or increase their enrichment? For a wildlifer, though, I helped teach an animal behavior class when I worked at the University of Georgia. And what we would do is we would assign students this assignment, exactly. And we would just tell them to go out in the world and observe things. And some of the observations were often wildlife, a lot of birds. And it just allowed the students to understand wildlife in their backyard and quantify patterns that they would have never thought of before. And so if you are personally interested in this, you could take the data that you're observing with elk here on Mount Jumbo and create something like this to create even more insight from the patterns that you're seeing within your community. So that was sort of a deep dive into sort of the status quo of animal behavior. And what do you think a problem with this approach might be, particularly for something like that lives on landscapes like this? Why can't I just go sit out with a cup of coffee and see what the elk are doing their whole year? Exactly. They move quite a bit. Yeah, as Ryan was saying, some of the bulls can move hundreds, if not thousands of miles within their lifetime. And so that's just really not feasible for one individual or really an entity of individuals to quantify animal behavior for large mammals in particular that are free roaming. And so often what we do as biologists are use these proxies like counters, so like a trail camera, for example, or GPS collars or visual observations that you all are well versed in. But often it's GPS collars. And what folks are trying to do is exactly what you all do when you collect data on elk, is observe patterns. And some of those patterns may, with like GPS data, for example, trail camera data, we may understand things like changes in their behavior across the 24-hour cycle. Are they more active during the day or night? We might observe things like seasonal changes as these patterns in biology. We also might understand repeated responses, so habituation in animals by capturing this data. And then last, we also might understand things like fidelity or avoidance. So for example, elk will often calve and rear their offspring in the same area of the previous year if their offspring survived. If their offspring did not survive, they'll move to a different area to increase their odds. And so we can detect all of these behavioral patterns through GPS collars and trail cameras for animals that move quite a bit. And just the power of this type of data. So this is some eBird data. Are y'all familiar with eBird? Okay, excellent. Yeah, eBird is essentially another form of citizen science, but also a way for folks to track birds locally. You can upload observations, et cetera. But this is a coalition of this data really assembled by, I believe it's the Audubon Society and NOAA, that shows that they took this citizen science data. It's a bunch of data. It's eBird, but it's also the banding data that USGS started. And they were able to say, because they have such a large data set across time, they were actually able to quantify that birds are spending winter further north. So they're wintering because they're wintering in these colder climates because overall the global temperature is increasing. And so without this long-term data set, which by the way goes back to 1966, scientists would have never been able to observe this pattern. And so this is really the power in these long-term data sets. And with elk, if we collect, or any big game, if we collect data that looks like this, so this is one herd migration. This is Wyoming, so Grand Teton National Park is over there. These animals are migrating from the Wind River Reservation, which is an Indian reservation in Wyoming, and moving onto this national forest and national park area. And if we collect this data long enough, we may be able to see shifts in those migratory pathways, shifts in behavior, how animals use these pathways, and that is valuable data for conserving this landscape and purchasing land or improving the habitat to help thwart some of these barriers to migration that may occur. But elk, they're very smart animals. They have a lot of what scientists call behavioral plasticity, which is just a fancy term for saying that they can learn based on experience. Mule deer, for example, they're very site fidelic, meaning that they'll come back to the same place year in, year out. elk do this thing called win, stay, lose, switch. It's like a game theory term, but basically what it means is that if they go to an area and it's really poor habitat in year 1, they will not return to that habitat in year 2. They'll go to another area adjacent. And so they're really behaviorally flexible. They can use experience and modify their behavior, but their neurobiology does not make them infinitely flexible. So there is a limit in how behaviorally flexible they can be. So often you'll see animals adjusting timing before they just completely abandon places, and you'll often see subtle changes before they make these really visible displacements. Okay, all of that biology lesson is to talk about these urban adjacent elk. These are the elk that we're observing when we look at the elk herd on Mount Jumbo. And so I want to take what we know about animal behavior, elk biology, and I want to examine through the lens of these urban adjacent elk. So elk in general, they have this strong sight fidelity. Most ungulates and cervids do, but habituated or urban elk can have even stronger sight fidelity. So in the case of Mount Jumbo, elk showing strong sight fidelity means that they're going to come back to this winter range year in, year out, even with human activity. And we can have things like weather variation and changes in forage. They'll still physically be here because this is their winter range, regardless of those variations in year. And I'll talk about why in just a second. And we're going to see these fine scale adjustments. Elk don't usually respond to disturbance very dramatically, or in these like very obvious ways. Obviously, if you approach an elk, they're going to run away, but they're not going to completely vacate or abandon an area. More often, they just make these fine scale movements, shifting where they bed, for example, back a few hundred feet, or increasing vigilance, so like looking around, but they're not going to move per se. And then last, I want to say that urban adjacent elk tolerance does not mean that there's lack of a cost to an animal. We may look at an animal, and I'll show you a slide in just a second. We might look at an animal and say, "Oh my gosh, look at all these, this beautiful forage they have to eat, or that they're eating, and that, in our parks and gardens, they serve as these permanent food sources." We might think that the animals living in these peri-urban environments are doing better. And an elk might tolerate repeated human presence because abandoning winter range like Mount Jumbo would mean areas that they go off to have deeper snow, more predators, or poor forage. And that's the unknown that they're not willing to risk, so to speak. And so an animal may absorb a small amount of discomfort or human presence so that they can take advantage of Mount Jumbo and that winter range. So staying put isn't necessarily proof of a comfort or the best habitat, but it is evidence that animals have made these trade-offs. And so just as an example, this is British Columbia. All these deer are snacking on this fruit that's dropping from a tree. And in a very snapshot, these animals are getting a ton more energy relative to their counterparts who maybe are in these environments adjacent that don't have as many food resources. But there's an inherent danger in living around humans, is that our vehicles, there are other dangers with pets, disease spread, et cetera. And so animals are constantly weighing these trade-offs when they're in these urban environments. And I want to talk about now why observing these urban elk and why programs like the Elk Spotters matter. And it's for one simple reason, is ecology is about trends. It's not about snapshots in time. And you all help us capture those trends. Most ecological change is gradual. Shifts in things like winter severity, group composition, calf recruitment, they don't happen dramatically. They accumulate. And without consistent observations across years, that slow change is going to be missed. You also help capture these rare events. So rare events often drive perception. You might see a mountain lion when you're viewing elk one day. You might see an unusually large group of elk. You might see an aggressive interaction between two bulls, for example. But scientifically, rare events only become informative when they're placed within the context of this long-term data. So without that baseline data, rare events may distort our understanding of what's really happening across the landscape. And so you allow us to keep it real, as it were, about what's really happening on the landscape by comparing to these long-term trends. And then every year feels different. You know, especially this year, snowpack changes, visitor use to an area changes, calving times may shift. The question is whether that difference represents a trend or is it just going to be some deviation. And that's why these long-term observational data sets is what it allows us to say that that was unusual. So we can compare to this baseline to then know these unusual events, and or if it's part of this larger pattern. And finally, I want to end with why this matters more broadly and why data like this and citizen science in general is so powerful to the field of animal ecology, wildlife conservation, and to scientists themselves is that many elk herds and animals in general, and I'm going to speak in Montana terms, across Montana and really throughout the West, more elk herds are going to occupy these peri-urban environments. Foothill developments, trail systems, and road networks, they're not going anywhere. And Mount Jumbo in the future will not be this unusual site. And that means that the patterns you all are seeing here, things like site fidelity, these behavioral, subtle timing of animals using the landscape, those are not isolated phenomena, and they're going to become central to how elk persist in modern human-dominated landscapes. And you all are collecting one of the, hopefully to be one of the more robust data sets in an urban environment to be able to assess that. And that's pretty powerful. And then, you know, what we're learning here is that lessons scale outward. And I just want to say is that when we observe consistent patterns over a year in a system like this, we're not just learning about this hillside. We're learning about behavioral strategies that elk use in these human-dominated landscapes. And if elk are repeatedly, you know, adjusting their timing rather than like abandoning habitat, for example, we should expect similar strategies elsewhere. So what we're seeing here in terms of these subtle behavioral shifts, we can apply to other urban landscapes. And that's how ecological, in my mind at least, ecological inference works, is that it's repeated pattern across these different systems. And we can all, as a country, learn from the work you're doing here. And then last, I'll say that long-term data sets, and I think I've said this a couple times throughout, is that long-term data sets are really rare and they're really valuable. Most wildlife research, and I'm sure some of y'all know this, is short-term. It's often like 2 or 3 years, and it's tied to a grant cycle or a graduate student. Long-term observational programs or initiatives like this one, they're just not really heard of because people don't really have the resources to keep things like this running. And from a scientific standpoint, for the reasons I just went over, they're really powerful. It allows us to detect these slow changes, shifts in animal behavior that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So I just want to thank you so much for all the work you do. And I think this is why this matters, what you're doing matters beyond just Mount Jumbo. You're helping build something that most systems don't have, and that's continuity. So thank you, and thank you for your attention.
Check, check. Hey, thank you, Heather. That was amazing. I got a new vocabulary word, ethogram, so thank you for that. I learned a lot. I'm sure some of you might have questions, so I don't know if I can invite Heather back up here, Ryan, and then Jeff, if you want to come up here too, you got a mic. Jeff would be happy to answer any questions too relating to management of conservation land system. So do we got any questions out there? Somebody's got to have a question. Yes.
So what is the best practice for disposing of a carcass? And does it matter as to whether you've had a positive or a negative CWD test result? And how do you integrate that type of testing into processing your meat?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. The question was, what's the best way to dispose of a carcass from a hunter harvest, or maybe one dies in your yard or something? And how do you incorporate a negative or positive result for that carcass into how you process the meat? So a Class 2 landfill is kind of the standard right now, and we're lucky that Republic Services is a Class 2 landfill. So we haul all carcasses so let me back up. If a hunter harvests a deer or an elk or a moose and the test comes back positive, we immediately notify the hunter, all right? And then from there, we give the hunter an option to relinquish all the meat and antlers back to FWP in exchange for a new license. And if the season, then they can choose to use that during that same season or the next year. Say it's like the last day of the season or something, they can use it the next year. Some people choose to keep or throw away the meat and keep the antlers, which I think that should be a fine, but that's just me. At any rate, so Class 2 landfill. The other way that you can destroy the prion is by incineration at like 15 billion degrees. I mean, it's like a ridiculously high heat source that's just not readily available on the landscape for managing agencies throughout the U.S. So Class 2 landfill. FWP provides carcass disposal sites throughout our entire region where we have basically a contract with Republic Services. We have these locations that you can dump your carcass into a big bin, and then those eventually make it to the landfill. If you were to find something in your yard and that died, like say you live in town, one got hit by a car, we'd still like to test it. And then those, regardless, are just going to go to the landfill. That's where we always take them. Did I get everything there? Processing. I didn't touch on that. So, if a hunter harvests a deer, and we take a sample, and they immediately take it to the processor processes it. It goes in their freezer. Maybe they already started eating it. 6 days have gone by. A positive test results. We call the hunter. It's up to them how they proceed. A lot of people who are maybe a little more wary of consuming positive or CWD positive meat tend to wait to consume, especially if they process it themselves. If they have a place where they can hang a carcass to age anyways, they're going to wait until they get that test result. That's what I do personally. We also notify the processors. Processors typically, by I think FDA standards, they're using a high solution. Excuse me. I think it's like 45% bleach solution to clean their area at the end of every day, which that also has been shown to kill the prion. Is that bleach, very high concentration of bleach solution. So that's how we move forward on that.
So you said something once before about the hunter can take his own sample. Is it just a piece of brain?
That's a great question. I guess I did not specify that. So there's a couple different ways that you can collect a sample to test for CWD. And also our website contains videos on like a how-to. YouTube has a ton of videos on how to take these samples. And so the easiest and most direct way is to take the lymph nodes, the pharyngeal lymph nodes, which are kind of at the back of the throat, kind of near where like your tonsils would be. And so the prion itself deposits or accumulates in both the brain matter, especially the brain stem, and then, or the obex, and then also in the pharyngeal lymph nodes. And so those nodes are very large. They're kind of kidney bean shaped, and we show exactly how to dissect those out through videos. And the other way is to take like the base of the brain and provide that as a sample. And the lymph nodes, I mean, everybody can feel that they have like, this lump in their throat right there. Typically, the way to do it is to cut directly above that all the way to the back of the throat, and then they're very visible from there. And we're happy to do it if it's, if someone wants to bring it in and have assistance with that.
What are the parameters that you use to help determine when you open jumbo up again in the spring?
Yeah.
And how do you go about identifying these parameters?
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. So the question was, what parameters do we use to determine when Mount Jumbo reopens in the spring? Ryan did a great job reviewing our closure dates, and there's an asterisk behind those reopening dates for the South Zone and the North Zone of March 15th and May 1st, because we frequently do extend past those dates. And the two factors we're really looking at are vegetation green up, and I'll get into that in a second, and continued elk presence. And so vegetation green up is very important because we need to have a certain amount of new growth on our perennial bunch grasses, approximately 3 inches, for that to be physically available for the elk to digest, versus deer, it's only approximately 1 inch. And so essentially, we need that vegetation to be more readily available. It's actively growing in the spring. What we see frequently from biweekly green up surveys starting in late February, most years, is that it actually seems to take closer towards the end of March, sometimes as late as mid-April. If anybody remembers the winter 2 or 3 years ago, we opened the South Zone April 13th, because even though there wasn't a ton of snow, it was very cold. And so the grass really just didn't green up. And so we're looking on a biweekly basis on Mount Jumbo to look at the vegetative conditions to make sure that when we reopen the South Zone, because the elk are still frequently in the South Zone, recreational users go in, dogs go in, it immediately pushes the elk to the North Zone. And so we want to make sure that the vegetative conditions, the habitat conditions, are suitable for those elk that have lasted through a long winter, and we're not pushing them into an area where there isn't suitable vegetation, if that makes sense. The reason why I bring up elk presence is that if the elk have already moved on us, which has happened, then we can go ahead and open on that date, right? So if the elk have relocated into the North Zone already, they've shown us that there's forage available, essentially, in the North Zone. But if they're still present in the South Zone and we reopen the South Zone, they immediately get pushed to the North Zone. So that's why it varies every year. I will, we didn't bring this chart up here, but frequently we extend the South Zone past March 15th. Very frequently it's between March 15th and April 1st, give or take. And we are going, I mentioned those specific triggers in terms of vegetation growth as provided by FWP. We've only ever extended the North Zone past May 1st 4 times, and that's only happened when the South Zone has extended past April 1st. It really takes a very cold and snowy winter for the North Zone to be extended past May 1st.
When we were coming here today, we saw a paraglider, and I'm wondering if there are places on the mountain that are in the open zone that paragliders use, or if we should be reporting paragliders too.
Yeah, you saw them above Mount Jumbo?
They were in the air.
Okay. It is possible that they were from Mount Sentinel, where they can launch year-round. So again, not to say that, that's the first paraglider I've seen this year, or heard about this year. We didn't get any reports of trespass on the south face, which is where you would hike up to launch from Mount Jumbo. My guess is that that's probably from Mount Sentinel, where people can access the paraglider launch points on an annual basis. Sorry, I didn't say that. Observed a paraglider earlier today, and questions about whether or not elk spotters should be reporting paragliders. I would say if you see someone in a paraglider launch from Mount Jumbo during the South Zone closure, absolutely. Yes, please report that.
More questions?
If you were, go ahead.
Go ahead.
If you want to report a zebra count, which I've never done, do you have the ability to mark all the zones that you're seeing zero? Like if I could see 5 zones up there, am I putting 0 and entering all of those? I've never done that.
What we've kind of said, and maybe we need to think about and refine this process. We're kind of just wondering where you were observing from. So you can just move that waypoint marker on the map to where you were observing from, and then we can get a general idea of what you could see where you were seeing zero elk. So that seemed to be kind of the most straightforward, clearest way, because yeah, you you could be observing multiple different places, and we don't need waypoints all over the place where you're thinking there aren't elk. So yes, as far as reporting 0 elk, and there's been some confusion around that, go ahead and just mark, where you got your spotting scope from your residence, and then we can kind of extrapolate and know what area of the mountain you were seeing. We have some more questions in the back there.
Their winter range is really reliable. Is their summer range the same as reliable, or is it more variable?
Yeah, it's a good question. At one point, I think there was some collar data on jumbo elk that, so elk typically in western Montana tend to be migrants more related to elevation. It might take them many miles to get to where they start accessing higher elevation. But that's typically what they're looking for, is those southerly aspect slopes that have, the southerly slopes, just like jumbo, tend to green up sooner. And as the snow line, travels up, that's kind of what they're following further up into the Rattlesnake is typically where these elk are going, and then also over to Marshall Canyon and beyond. So I wouldn't say these elk have to travel very far because, I'll be honest, this is a bold statement, but western Montana is not elk habitat. If you think about elk are an obligate grassland species, this historically is not a giant grassland. Yes, we have pockets, and there's always been elk likely in this area even before white people came. But this isn't like the best of habitat, and so that's why we don't have these giant herds of 1,000 elk like you might see in eastern Montana and other grassland areas. Their summer range is a little more sporadic and probably not quite as contiguous, and so they definitely dial in, just as she was mentioning, they know where they're going and year after year. And a lot of that also depends on fire. They might shift around depending on fire. Fire is a wonderful thing in this part of the state and across the whole West if properly administered, or as long as it's not like an extremely intense burn. It just creates wonderful habitat for elk because you basically reset the successional stages of the vegetation on the landscape. And so you're kind of starting over and also you thin out some of the bigger trees that are closing in the canopy, and you kind of start to get a lot of those grasses and forbs and things like that come up, after a fire. Elk will cue into that like the very next year. We burned, or the U.S. Forest Service burned on Strawberry Ridge out here just 2 summers ago or something in an effort to, kind of boost the habitat quality in that area. So I think I danced around your question, but maybe I kind of got there.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I'm going to let Heather.
Please. She knows way more than I do.
What kind of research projects are NEF and you focused on right now, and what?
Yeah, great question. Well, the funding structure of the Elk Foundation is very grassroots. So a lot of our chapters, our volunteer chapters, will drive sort of like local projects working with state biologists. So that's sort of like the current model that I walked into. And I am building a research program to sort of bridge the gap between state agencies and federal agencies, and that doing more regional analyses. So one of the first efforts we're doing is in the American Southwest. So the Elk Foundation spent a couple $1 million, or over the course of 4 years, spent quite a bit of money with a partner match with the state agency of Arizona, New Mexico, to understand elk dynamics in the Mexican wolf recovery zone. So we funded a lot of GPS collars in that area, and we just started a project with Utah looking at fire effects. And so combining those data sets across these 3 states to look at how climate change and really the durability of habitat under climate change, so like drought essentially, how that's influencing elk survivability as it relates to movement strategies, and essentially using that information to create a metric for the state to know that they're in a drought so they can change the allocation of tags appropriately. So essentially we're building a model for them using data that we helped fund going to those partners and saying, hey, can you analyze the data this way to give us this model output that our state partners can then use? So that's an example of one of the projects that sort of examine elk and questions related to large game ecology at a larger scale. So something like a region or something that's not really the state's mandate or they don't have the resources to do. Did I answer your question? And I can talk more about projects, but that's sort of thematically where we're going.
There was a question right here.
Yeah, I was wondering about with this population, is there hunting pressure on them? And also, is there ever wolf predation?
The question was, hello, yes, okay. The question was, is there hunting pressure on this population? Is there ever wolf predation? The answer to both those questions is yes. The hunting pressure is pretty minimal, and that does not occur when they're on jumbo proper on the winter range. Any of the pressure that group receives is going to be, of course, during the hunting season, but it's very limited because the rattlesnake is a wilderness area, and there is a recreation corridor that goes into the rattlesnake that you can take bicycles. So there has been some hunting people. I mean, you got to get like 17 miles in, to the end of the corridor. Some people go all the way back there. We have had some Amish folks that actually take a wagon and horses and put it in a camp, which I think that's just fantastic. And I mean, I would love to go with them. I think that sounds like I'll just cook. I'll cook for them. But that just sounds like a good time. So it's a very niche hunt for folks that get in there to put any pressure on them. That's if they're in the rattlesnake. If they're over on the Marshall Canyon side, or if they get out, to other areas that are a little bit more accessible, there could certainly be pressure. But we actually used to offer a few cow tags for this, specifically for those guys that wanted to walk, 10 miles with an elk on their back, which is not me. If you ever walked with an elk on your back or part of an elk, it's grueling, and like a mile is plenty, So it's a tough hunt, but there's some folks that really like to do it by bike. As far as wolf predation, we have wolves all over, western Montana. There's certainly predation that occurs. I don't know of any instances of it occurring right on the face of jumbo here, but I'm certain that population definitely has predation pressure once they get a little bit further to the north. We regularly count wolves in the area. I think we've had collared wolves in the rattlesnake. Other fun animals that we've had in this area. We've actually had trail cam photos of wolverines very close to the saddle of jumbo. There's been a lynx up there that we have record of, and then further up the rattlesnake corridor, I personally had cameras out a couple winters ago. Had 2 different wolverines and 3 different lynx. And there's wolves that cross through that area as well. But
Continuing with that, how about cats?
Yeah, that's probably a more likely predator, which I did not mention, in this area is probably going to be mountain lions. There's plenty of mountain lions in the rattlesnake, as we probably all know. They get into trouble from time to time. I suspect they're definitely feasting on elk. But there's also another ungulate that is probably a little bit easier to deal with that they probably cue in on more, and that's white-tailed deer, at least in the lower not lower rattlesnake proper, but in the lower elevations of the rattlesnake. A lot of white-tailed deer get hammered by cats there, which is probably pretty good.
Some more questions? I kind of have a quick one, Ryan. Are any of the elk on jumbo and the jumbo herd currently collared right now?
No. We don't have any collared individuals up there. I would love to put some collars on those elk and primarily to figure out specifically where they're spending their summer. And then also, why are they not showing up? So where are they when they don't show up? There's been winters when there's been pretty decent snow and it's been pretty cold and they're just not there. Are they just tucked away where we can't see them? I think that would be a fascinating project to get some collars out there. And, and then that also would give us an idea of some of the survival aspects. If we had a good enough sample size, you can start to look at, the survival. If you get a mortality from one of your callers, you can go out and investigate things like that and determine cause of death. So that's a good idea. Yeah, maybe we can figure out some funding for that at some point.
Look forward to the update next year's get together and see where we're at there. But that sounds really cool too.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Awesome. Well, thanks again, Heather and Ryan, for coming out tonight. That was amazing. Yay. And how lucky are we to be in this beautiful space in the public library where we get to look out the window and see our subject matter, and fortunate enough today that hopefully all got to catch a glimpse of the elk too. Just all the stars aligned for tonight. So that was pretty amazing. Before I draw some names right now, again, at the front table there, we got a QR code. If you're not a current elk spotter and after tonight's event and presentation you're interested, you can go ahead and shoot that QR code to the simple interest form to fill out, and then I'll follow up with you. I also want to point out, when I'm not spotting elk, I'm leading volunteer events out on our conservation lands. That could be weed pulls, native seed collection, planting events, fence removals on Jumbo. So if you're interested in another volunteer opportunity and getting your hands dirty with us, I got a QR code up there that you can shoot, and that'll lead you to our volunteer interest form, and I will follow up with you and get you on our listserv so you'll be notified of any upcoming opportunities. So just want to make sure I mention that as well.